At first glance, this photo shows what looks like a happy, peaceful family. The kind that seems completely ordinary, even picture-perfect. But life doesn't always stay that way. Sometimes the most perfect images hide the darkest realities, because in January 2026, this family becomes one of those cases. And at the center of it all is a 12-year-old child who would later witness something so brutal that even experienced detectives were left shaken. It's the kind of case that didn't just shock one neighborhood. It captured the attention of the entire state of Georgia. And it leaves behind a simple but heavy question that lingers long after. Why did this happen in the first place?
This is really just an unspeakable tragedy. Just this neighborhood really still in shock. Lots of people have been driving by too.
This case takes us to Lawrenceville, Georgia, in Gwinnett County, about 30 miles northeast of Atlanta. In 2026, this area is known as one of the fastest growing counties in the state, a place that feels peaceful on the surface. In fact, around this time, Gwinnett County had actually seen a noticeable improvement in safety. Violent crime had gone down, and homicides had dropped by around 25% compared to the year before. Local officials were even cautiously describing it as progress, like things were finally moving in the right direction. But behind those numbers, there was still a disturbing pattern that never fully went away. A large portion of the cases weren't random acts of violence. They were domestic, family conflicts, relationship breakdowns, arguments that slowly escalated until they crossed a line that could never be taken back. And then, in the early hours of January 23rd, that same pattern would appear again. But this time, it would leave an entire community completely and utterly shaken. The location was the 1000 block of Brook Ivy Court, a quiet residential street that, in every visible way, looked ordinary. Inside that house lived a close-knit extended Indian family. Mimu Dogra, 43, was known as a warm and devoted mother and relative, living there with her 12-year-old daughter and several family members. Her brother, Gaurav Kumar, 33, also lived in the home, along with Nidhi Chander, 37, and Harish Chander, 38. It was a shared household built on the idea of family support and trust, where multiple generations and relatives lived under one roof. 3 children were also in the home that night, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old, all settling in for what seemed like an ordinary evening with nothing out of place. But in the days before the tragedy, a neighbor had noticed something unsettling. A woman from that house was often seen outside, pacing and crying on phone calls. It wasn't a one-time moment. It kept happening. The neighbor later admitted she felt something was wrong but didn't step in, telling herself it might not be her place.
And it was scary I didn't understand what was going on, so I was totally shocked to see it was something really tragic so close.
13 days before the massacre, Gwinnett County Police had already been called to the Brook Ivy Court home. A man reported a dispute involving a male relative, and officers responded to the scene. When they arrived, the situation was tense but never turned violent. No punches were thrown, no weapons were pulled. In the end, the caller agreed to leave, and the case was closed just like that. A report was filed, and life moved on. But that address didn't disappear from the system. It was now on record, a home where police had already been once before because of a family conflict. And just under 2 weeks later, that same home would become the center of a tragedy where 4 people would lose their lives.
It's definitely a tragic situation. Four people dying at the same time, especially with children in the home, is very, very tragic. It's shocking to anybody.
According to the police report, at around 2 a.m., someone arrived at the home armed and with clear intent. In just a short span of time, everything inside that house changed forever. Mimu Dogra was shot and killed. Gaurav Kumar was shot and killed. Nidhi Chander was shot and killed. Harish Chander was shot and killed. 4 lives ended inside the place they were supposed to feel safest, their own home. Inside the house, everything unfolded in a way no child should ever have to experience. According to initial investigations, in pure fear, the children ran and hid inside a closet, pressing themselves together in the dark. A 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old daughter trying desperately to stay quiet while the world outside collapsed. From inside that small space, they heard everything: the shouting, the movement, the gunshots, and then the sudden silence that followed, the kind of silence that feels even louder than the violence before it. And in that silence, something shifted. The 12-year-old daughter made a decision no child should ever be forced to make. She picked up a phone and called 911. The full audio of that call was never publicly released, but what is known is simple. That call became the moment everything outside that house finally started moving toward help. However, later testimony would add more context to what really happened that night, details that slightly change how this moment is understood. We'll go deeper into that later in the story. When officers arrived, what they found confirmed exactly what the child had reported. Inside the home were 4 adults, all of them shot and killed. In another part of the house, they found the 3 children still hiding in the closet, physically unharmed but visibly shaken and completely overwhelmed by what they had just lived through. The scene inside was already devastating, but the situation outside added another layer of urgency. A vehicle was still parked in the driveway, which raised immediate concern that the suspect may not have gotten far. That detail triggered a wider search of the area, and K9 units were brought in to track any possible escape route. The dogs soon picked up a trail leading away from the house and toward the wooded area behind the property. That search didn't take long before it reached its end. Hidden in the trees just behind the same home where the killings had taken place, officers located and arrested the suspect, a 51-year-old man named Vijay Kumar. He was identified as the husband of Mimu Dogra and, most painfully, the father of the 12-year-old daughter who had just called 911. And when you really sit with that detail, it becomes almost impossible to process. That child, hiding in a closet, listening to everything fall apart, trying to protect 2 younger kids, whispering into a phone for help, was calling emergency services on her own father. Her mother had already been killed inside that house, and earlier that same night, she had been in the same vehicle as the man who carried out the attack, driven from Atlanta to Lawrenceville in the middle of an argument that would never de-escalate. According to investigators, the events that led up to that night began earlier in Atlanta during a dispute between Vijay Kumar and Mimu Dogra. It was described as serious enough that it didn't just stay verbal. It escalated, continued, and eventually moved locations. Instead of ending the situation, the conflict traveled with them from one city to another until it reached its final and irreversible outcome in Gwinnett County. Court proceedings and charges later reflected that authorities treated this as a premeditated act rather than something impulsive. Vijay Kumar was eventually taken into custody without resistance. When officers and K9 units located him, there was no confrontation, only an arrest in the wooded area behind the home where everything had unfolded. He now faces multiple counts of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault, along with additional charges of cruelty to children for exposing minors to extreme violence inside the home. Those charges are important because they formally recognize something often overlooked in cases like this. The children were not just present during the tragedy, they were direct victims of it. And that is what makes this case so heavy. Not just the scale of what happened, but the fact that it happened inside a family, inside a home, and in front of children who will now carry that night with them for the rest of their lives. Sadly, in the long time we've covered cases on this channel, we have seen this time and time again. And what makes this particular case hit so differently is what you find when you look at this family's social media. On Mimu Dogra's Facebook page, you see a family that, by every visible measure, had made it. Photos of celebrations, family gatherings, holidays, the kind of moments people take the time to document because they are genuinely proud of what they have built together. This was an Indian immigrant family that had come to America and from the outside appeared to have done everything right. An Atlanta address, a home in Gwinnett County for the extended family, children in school, multiple relatives living under one roof, holding on to the family structure that had always given them their foundation while building something completely new in a foreign country. That is not a small thing. That takes years of sacrifice, of starting over, of figuring out how to belong somewhere that was not built for you. And from every photo Mimu ever posted, it looked like they had done exactly that, like they had genuinely arrived at the life they came here for. But here is what this channel has learned from covering cases like this one over the years. The photos never tell the whole story. The smiles do not show what was happening behind closed doors. They do not show the tension that had been quietly building. They do not show a woman pacing her neighborhood at night, crying on the phone over and over. They do not show a police call that was documented, filed, and then forgotten. And they do not show a 12-year-old girl who, in just a matter of weeks, would be forced to witness something that no child, no person, should ever have to see. Domestic violence inside immigrant communities is one of the most consistently underreported forms of abuse in this country, and there are very real reasons for that. Cultural expectations around keeping family matters private, the fear of community judgment, language barriers that make it harder to reach services, and in some cases, concerns around immigration status that make victims afraid that calling for help will only create new problems on top of the ones they are already living with. All of those things create silence. And silence in situations like this one has a cost. Mimu was seen pacing outside, crying. A neighbor noticed it, felt something was off, and held back. And while we are not here to place blame on that neighbor, most people in that same position would have done the same thing. This case is a reminder that those quiet moments of hesitation matter more than we realize while we are standing inside them. The signs were visible, they were documented, and still, the system moved on. When this case went to court in March of 2026, details came to light that had never been part of the public reporting, and one of them changes the way you understand everything that happened that night. According to testimony from investigators at the hearing, Mimu and Vijay Kumar's 12-year-old daughter did not simply hide in a closet and hear the shooting from another room. She was present for part of it. A detective later testified that the girl watched her father reach into his pockets and pull out 2 pistols, one from each pocket, one gun in each hand, and open fire on Needy and Harish, her aunt and uncle, directly in front of her. And then, according to that same testimony, she ran to him. In the middle of all of it, the shots, the screaming, the chaos, this 12-year-old girl ran toward her father and begged him to stop. That is not a child paralyzed by fear. That is a child who still loved her father in that moment, who believed on some level that he could still be reached, that he could still come back. Shortly after, she was the one who dialed 911. We are not using her name and we are not showing her face, but it would be wrong to let this video move forward without making clear what she actually lived through. By March of 2026, the legal weight of this case had grown significantly. Gwinnett County District Attorney Patsy Austin Gatson announced that her office would be seeking the death penalty against Vijay Kumar. In a packed courtroom at the county jail, Chief Assistant District Attorney John Melvin stood before a judge and made it official. The state of Georgia was pursuing the maximum punishment for what happened on Brook Ivy Court that January night. 4 counts of malice murder, a child eyewitness, 3 minors left without a family. The prosecution looked at the full scope of what occurred and determined that nothing less than the ultimate consequence was appropriate. The case also drew attention well beyond Gwinnett County. The Indian Consulate General in Atlanta issued a formal public statement expressing grief over the shooting and confirming that at least one of the victims held Indian citizenship. The consulate pledged direct assistance to the surviving family and said it was in active contact with local authorities. That level of diplomatic involvement in what began as a domestic homicide case reflects just how far the impact of that night reached, across a community, across a country, and across an ocean. Before we close, their names deserve to be said again, not as case details, but as people. Mimu Dogra was 43 years old, a mother, a sister, a woman who had built something real in a new country and documented it proudly for the people she loved. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to watch her daughter grow up. Gaurav Kumar was 33, Mimu's younger brother, who had opened his home to family the way people do when they genuinely believe that keeping each other close is what keeps each other safe. Needy Chander was 37, and Harish Chander was 38, both residents of that home. Both part of the extended family structure that had made a life together in Lawrenceville. All 4 of them were gone in minutes, inside the home they shared, and 3 children were left to carry that night for the rest of their lives. Vijay Kumar is facing the death penalty. The legal process is moving forward, and while justice in a courtroom matters, it does not return what was taken. It does not give those children their family back. What we can do, from wherever we are watching this, is take domestic violence seriously before it reaches this point. Sadly, in 2026, this isn't the first time a case like this has made headlines. In fact, the year has already seen a troubling number of family tragedies, making it even more important to talk about them. One of those cases involved the Alfaro family, where a devastating act of violence ended in a fatal shooting within the home. Another reminder of how these incidents continue to surface, often with heartbreaking consequences.
Pain, anger. Hard to understand how a person that's supposed to be a protector and a father to those girls would have done something so hideous. So it's just a lot to process right now.
15 days. That's all the new year had given this family before it took everything from them. And the man standing on that sidewalk had just lost his sister and his niece to someone who was supposed to protect them. So how does a family that seemed completely fine, no police reports, no restraining orders, no history anyone could point to, end up at the center of one of the most devastating events their neighborhood had ever seen? Before we talk about what happened on Lurlay Avenue, let's talk about who this family really was. Because this wasn't just a headline. This was a household full of life, daughters borrowing each other's things, a mother who showed up at every school event, and a family that their community rallied around the moment they learned something had gone terribly wrong.
100 feet away from my home is really scary. This idea, because anything can happen, and the fact that it happened in one household, it can happen to another household. So I'm praying for them.
Roxana Rodriguez was 48 years old. She was the heart of this household, the kind of woman whose presence filled a room with warmth without demanding it. Details about her professional life haven't been made fully public yet, but the people who knew her described her consistently the same way. A devoted mother, a fixture in her community, someone who showed up for her daughters, for her neighbors, for anyone who needed her. She had lived on Lurlay Avenue long enough to put roots down, long enough for this neighborhood to feel like hers. She was not finished. She had decades left to give. Her younger daughter, Sienna, was 17, still in high school, still in that particular stretch of life where you're trying on different versions of yourself, figuring out who you are, what you love, what kind of person you want to become. Friends and family who spoke to reporters after her death remembered her as bright and kind, and they remembered how close she was to her older sister. And that sister was Desiree Alvarez, 19 years old. She still lived at home, that particular stage of early adulthood where you're between two worlds, one foot inside childhood and one foot stepping toward whatever comes next. She was asleep that morning when her world ended, and when it ended, she was the only one still standing. Now, what's really sad about this case is that by all accounts, Lakewood is a safe place. Quiet streets, neat houses, families feeling secure, the last place you'd expect something like this.
Obviously, this incident is a tragedy to the city of Lakewood. Lakewood is one of the safest cities in LA County. Definitely going to affect our community regarding this tragedy. But like the lieutenant said...
But on the morning of January 15th, 2026, all of that quiet would be broken. To be fair, there was nothing that day. No weather event, no community crisis, no visible sign that suggested it would be anything other than ordinary. Desiree was asleep. That detail matters because it tells us something about when this began. It was early enough that a 19-year-old was still in bed, still in that deep morning sleep that only gets interrupted by something loud enough to pull you out of it. She was pulled out of it by gunfire. Inside the home on Lurlay Avenue, something had shifted. Roxana and Sienna were both there, whether they were awake, whether they were in the same part of the house, whether either of them had any warning. None of that has been disclosed by authorities. What the investigation confirmed is this: both were shot in the upper torso, and both were pronounced dead at the scene. By the time Desiree was fully awake, her father was in front of her. Hector Lionel Alfaro was 52 years old. Her father, the man who was supposed to be her protector, and he was armed. He raised the weapon. He fired at her. Multiple times. Every single shot missed. It isn't clear from the investigation whether Hector intended to miss, whether his aim failed him, or whether Desiree moved in a way that saved her own life. What is clear is that she survived, physically unharmed, and she would carry what she witnessed for the rest of her life. After firing at his eldest daughter, Hector turned the gun on himself. He died in front of her, and then Desiree did the only thing left to do. She picked up a phone and called 911.
Friends say this is a picture of 48-year-old Roxana Rodriguez and her 17-year-old daughter, Sienna Alfaro. They were found shot to death in two separate bedrooms of this home on Lurlay Avenue in Lakewood. Roxana's husband and Sienna's father, 52-year-old Hector Leonel Alfaro, was found dead in the den of the home. According to sheriff's deputies, the couple's 19-year-old daughter woke up to gunfire just before 8 o'clock Thursday morning. She told deputies her father shot her mother and sister, tried to shoot her several times but missed, and then turned the gun on himself, taking his life in front of his daughter.
Desiree gave the dispatcher everything she had. She told them what had happened. She told them her father had shot at her, and she waited. When deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived at the 5800 block of Lurlay Avenue, they found her outside the home. distraught, a 19-year-old standing in front of a house that was no longer what it had been the night before. Inside, investigators found Roxana and Sienna, both gone. They also found Hector, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 2 firearms were recovered from the scene. Authorities have not disclosed the types of weapons or how Hector had obtained them. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication anyone other than the family was involved. This was a contained act of violence, beginning and end, inside one home in the span of minutes. The medical examiner performed autopsies on all 3. The findings were consistent with what Desiree had reported. The investigation was classified as a murder self-harm. And because Hector died at the scene, there was no arrest to make, no charges to file, no courtroom where anyone would be held accountable. The system didn't get the chance to intervene. It was over before anyone knew it had started, so the only question now is who was Hector Lionel Alfaro, and how did a man described as the head of a close-knit family become the person who tore that family apart? As mentioned earlier, Hector Alfaro was 52 years old and had lived in Lakewood with Roxana and their daughters. He worked. He supported his household. His brother-in-law, speaking to reporters in the days after the shooting, described the family as close-knit, and the speed with which neighbors and extended family rallied around Desiree confirmed that. These were not people on the margins of their community. They were woven into it. There was no criminal history involving any member of the household that has surfaced in subsequent reporting. No prior calls for service to that address. No documented domestic violence. No restraining orders. No public record of any conflict serious enough to involve law enforcement. Not once, not ever. That is a significant fact, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, it means Roxana and her daughters were not failed by a system that ignored their cries for help. On the other hand, it means there was no mechanism, no file, no flag, no open case that could have put anyone in a position to intervene. Hector presented to every person outside his home as a functioning husband and father. Investigators examined his background after the shooting. They reviewed his finances, his communications, his recent activity. They looked for the thing that would explain it. The fracture point, the breaking moment, the pressure that had been building without anyone seeing it. As of this reporting, they have not released a motive. The absence of a motive is one of the most unsettling parts of this case, and it raises a question that researchers who study familicide, the killing of multiple family members by a single perpetrator, have been grappling with for decades. Most perpetrators in cases like this are men. Most use firearms, and a significant portion have no documented history of violence before the act itself. Some plan it in advance. They come to see their family as an extension of themselves and decide that if they are going to die, the people bound to them must die too. Others act in a sudden break, a moment where despair or rage collapses into something irreversible before anyone around them has time to respond. In either case, premeditation or impulse, the result is identical. The violence comes first. The understanding, if it ever comes at all, comes after. We don't know which category Hector Alfaro belongs to. We may never know. What we do know is that he had access to 2 firearms, that no one outside his home was aware of whatever was happening inside it, and that on the morning of January 15th, he used that access in the most devastating way a person can. Mental health professionals note that men, particularly, are far less likely to seek help when they're struggling, not because the struggle isn't real, but because the cultural expectations around strength and self-sufficiency make asking for help feel like failure. Depression in men often doesn't look like sadness. It looks like withdrawal, irritability, a flattening of engagement, changes that are easy to explain away, easy to miss, and that don't trigger a call to a crisis line. None of that excuses what happened on Lurlay Avenue. The choice Hector made belongs entirely to him. But it is a reason to think about the people in our lives who seem fine, the ones we don't worry about, the ones we assume are handling it. Sometimes they're not. In the days following the shooting, the community around Lurlay Avenue responded the way communities do when they're shaken by something they didn't see coming. Neighbors expressed shock. Family members gathered around Desiree. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to support her because a 19-year-old who has lost her mother, her sister, and the father she thought she knew, and who is now the sole surviving member of her immediate family, needs practical support as much as she needs anything else. His brother-in-law spoke to reporters outside the home. His words were unpolished in the way that real grief makes words.
Luckily, she was a survivor of this tragedy. And it's just trying to deal with the consequences of their father's doing. Pain, anger, hard to understand how a person that's supposed to be a protector and a father to those girls would have done something so hideous.
He wasn't describing a man he had always feared. He was describing a man he hadn't seen coming. And that distinction, that gap between who Hector appeared to be and what he did, is what makes this case impossible to simply close and move on from. There is no verdict here, no sentencing hearing where Desiree could stand in a courtroom and speak her truth directly to the man who took everything from her, no moment of formal accountability. By killing himself, Hector ensured that whatever answers existed died with him. He ensured there would be no trial, no confrontation, no public reckoning. Whatever he was carrying into that morning, he carried it in silence, and he took it out of reach. That is its own kind of cruelty. Desiree Alvarez is 19 years old. She went to sleep one night as the eldest daughter of a family of 3. She woke up as the only one left. She has already done the hardest thing most of us will never be asked to do. She made the call. She walked out of that house. She spoke to the deputies who needed information from her at the moment when she had nothing left to give. She has let the people around her, the extended family, the neighbors, the strangers who donated to her GoFundMe, carry some of what she's holding. None of that makes her okay. None of it repairs what was broken on the morning of January 15th, but it says something about who she is, and it says something about what survival actually looks like, not as triumph, not as resolution, but as the act of continuing when continuing is the only option left. As we remember Roxana Rodriguez and Sienna Alfaro, not just for how they died, but for how they lived, one question has to be asked. How do we reach the people who are struggling in silence? How do we build a world where someone in crisis feels able to reach for help instead of reaching for a weapon? Where the people around them know what to look for? Where the warning signs, even the quiet, invisible ones, don't go unseen until it's too late? This case doesn't fit the usual narrative. There's no villain to prosecute, no system that visibly failed, no turning point where someone could have stepped in and changed the outcome. Just 2 lives ended, and 1 life irrevocably changed inside a house on a quiet street in a neighborhood that was supposed to be safe. Roxana Rodriguez, Sienna Alfaro, a mother and her daughter. They deserved more ordinary mornings, more of the life they were living, more time. Remember their names. If you or someone you know is struggling, help is available right now. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day. Call or text 988 from anywhere in the United States. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available around the clock at 1-800-799-7233. You don't have to be in immediate danger to call. They're there for the in-between moments too. If this case stayed with you, if it made you think about someone in your life or about your own situation, trust that feeling and please reach out. Thank you for honoring Roxana and Sienna with your time. If this video meant something to you, consider subscribing so these stories keep reaching the people who need to hear them. We'll see you in the next one.